September 7th, special meeting of the Budget, Capital, and Personnel Committee. Are there any changes to the agenda? Seeing none, we'll move on to minutes approval. Would somebody like to move the minutes for August 9th? Rich moves, Glenn seconds. Is there any discussion? Okay, no discussion. Are we ready to vote? All in favor? All right, that's unanimous. Thank you. Okay, we have a first resolution authorizing the use of the contingent fund to support broadband expansion in the town of Newfield. Since this came to us from HED, Martha, would you like to move it?
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah, I'll move it.
Can I get a second? Glenn seconds. Okay, Martha, you want to speak to this because I know it's a little more complicated than it looks.
A little more complicated. Yes, thank you, Deborah. At HED, we had a good discussion, but Nick Helmholt, who's the staff working on this, was actually out of town. He was calling in remote. It was really hard to understand. He, like, every third word was all we could hear. So Chuck Bartosh, who was the director or owner or whatever of Point Broadband, mostly spoke about his project. There was a question about, I'm back up, the internal broadband working group for the county. That's Katie, Nick, myself as chair of HED, Henry Granison as the TCOG committee member on broadband, and Dan Klein had met over the summer. We decided that we should ask all the local ISP, all the local providers, for estimates of what they could do using the Fujitsu study. What could they do for the 470 some homes in the 3 southern towns? How much would it cost? How many homes could they cover? We got this resolution at HED without any report on the other ISP responses. So I said, I don't understand how we can even look at this proposal until we know what the other ISPs might propose. So,
but this is time sensitive.
Chuck Bartosh said this was time sensitive. He has equipment in the field in Newfield. And if we didn't, Nick later confirmed the following, after HED confirmed that it would cost us an extra $40,000 if we didn't approve this by September 14th. So we went ahead and approved it at HED. We didn't have all that information, but we had enough. It was voted out of HED. And since HED, we said, okay, what do we do about this? Because some of us really wanted to see what the other ISPs might propose. Maybe they would propose a cheaper coverage. Maybe they'd propose more homes that would end up being a better cost per home, et cetera, et cetera. So the decision was to propose that we pass this out of BCP today, take it off the agenda tonight from the legislature, have a special legislature meeting on September 14th, brief legislature meeting. By then we will have all the information. Nick will be here. He'll have all the information from Hafele and Spectrum, the 2 other potential providers, and we can compare apples to apples. So that's the request here, is to go ahead and pass this out of BCP. If we pass this from here, we would be able to do it on the 14th, next Tuesday.
If it continues to be
assuming
the best deal.
And if it's not the best deal, we won't vote for it.
Okay, Nick is here. Did she get that right, Nick?
Yeah, that's all accurate. I will say we've gotten a very detailed set of information back from Hafele. I'm still waiting on Spectrum. It's that's the one area that's a question mark right now is what we'll hear back from them.
And the understanding is that Hafley's bidding on a different set of houses, so they're not in competition with Point.
Hafley did not intend to build out in this area. It's not economical for them, as I discussed with the Lee Hafley. So yeah, they've got other sets of houses, primarily in Caroline, but also in Infield and town of Ithaca, and a small number in Danby, that they're looking at.
And have you communicated now with Spectrum? Will they have their information to us by the 10th?
I've asked for them to get it to us by the 10th. I've been in touch with them. But whether or not they're able to get it done is unclear at this point. They've said that it typically takes them 6 weeks, and we asked them basically the beginning of August. So we're going to be right on the cusp of what we're going to know there. So.
Okay, and do they understand that if they don't have it in to us by the 10th, they're out and running?
Well, they're out of the running for this portion of this project. Not, there's still, many other parts of the county that would be open for them, and that would be the case. So.
Okay, yeah, all right, thank you. Now, are there questions? I saw hands. Mike?
So what is the basis of our commitment for anything here that he's asking for 75,000? Have we authorized that in some way that we would go ahead and support financially the expansion of broadband to places in the county? Or is this standing on its own bottom, sitting on its own bottom, I should say?
So I'm not sure I totally follow the question. Are you asking if there's a precedent for this?
Yeah, where did it come up that the county should pay $75,000? Did we offer that to these ISPs? Or is it just, you come back to us, we want to see broadband, and tell us how much you need? Yeah.
So the background is that in the discussion we had with Point Broadband and Chuck Bartosh back in August, we asked, to figure out how to address these underserved areas. And he said he could do one section, the section under consideration in the town of Newfield, if the county was able to pay $75,000. That was basically his offer. Doing the math on it, in terms of looking at, generally, relative prices, it was actually relatively reasonable because of this mobilization fee had already been paid basically to get a crew into the field. So looking at that from that vantage point, we decided that it would be worth exploring and advancing for consideration, as it is time sensitive. So it is somewhat unusual and unique in that perspective. Yeah. But we have not offered any other terms to Point or other ISPs.
But isn't this setting a precedent for, I don't know, I heard one figure, there were 500 and some houses that aren't served, and this is 140. And I'm not opposed to trying to help here, but are we going to get somebody who wants to do another 100 and wants $200,000 from us? And we've set a precedent that we're going to give something, we're going to help support this. How much is the town of Newfield putting into this?
We had not approached the town of Newfield about supporting it financially, but yeah, it could be considered. That is one thing under consideration, is that whether this sets a precedent, and whether that precedent is a percentage of the project cost or a dollar figure per household, is something that we would want to consider, carefully going forward.
Is the town of Newfield going to put anything into this?
I was not anticipating that they were, but Mike Allinger, I believe, is on the call here. We could.
I just want to say I'm feeling uncomfortable about this because it's saying to me that we're going to, at the county, we're going to help support by ourselves the cost of broadband for whoever comes along and makes us a proposal. time sensitive or not, I guess I got a problem with it.
Okay. So Rich and then Martha?
I have the same concerns.
Martha?
Yeah, that's a legitimate question. I mean, other municipalities haven't asked or received funding. You know, the town of Dryden, of course, is, as everybody knows, doing its own municipal project. And
Right.
so there's certainly a need there. I think the basis for us being involved has to do with the fact that we committed to and have been pursuing a study with Fujitsu that we funded most of. Many of the towns did support that study with at $5,000 a piece. I don't know if there's a resolution somewhere that's, or maybe we just put it into the budget for 2021. We must have passed a resolution saying that this was something we were going to do. Did we actually pass a resolution about the study, Nick?
It was an OTR in the budget.
Yeah, for the study, not necessarily to fund the build out. But if I can interject here, I think we need to remember that broadband was one of the things that the ARPA funds could have been used for, because one thing we've learned from this pandemic is that everybody needs broadband. Another thing that we've learned in the course of trying to figure out how to get broadband everywhere in the county is that trying to do something that reaches every home is inordinately expensive and beyond the county's ability to afford. Similarly, I think a build out in our smaller rural towns is really beyond their financial ability to support. And I think that's where we come in. I know that this is about $416 per house, which is incredibly reasonable compared to some of the numbers we've been hearing. So I'm not at all averse to benefiting the town of Newfield at this level per house, nor would I be averse to benefiting our other rural towns at this level per house. And I would ask us to remember all of the things that we do as a county to support the city of Ithaca. I know there are arguments to be made about the singular importance of the city of Ithaca, but our other towns are important as well. And broadband has become very much a utility that everyone depends on. If we can facilitate this build out for this relatively small amount of money, I would urge my colleagues to do so. Okay, Martha, then Mike.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. You know, you raised a good point, Mike. I will say that this is about like the Fujitsu study was about unserved homes, about homes that didn't have it. It wasn't that where the broadband wasn't great, which is frankly most of the town of Dryden, rather than unserved in the town of Dryden. So there's a difference. And I think, I mean, when I will feel much better, I was the one at HED who raised these concerns about not knowing what the other ISPs were going to do. And I voted yes then, but I was only on the condition that we figure out what the other ISPs were going to do. So I think we could certainly on September 14th, you know, sort of make a commitment that basically a $417 a home limit or price range for the remaining unserved homes might be a reasonable target. That would be, if it's 293 unserved that we end up serving, that's a short of 120, it's about 122,000. I think that's a big service. That would be a meaningful, important commitment to make.
To our taxpayers in all the small towns.
Yeah, so I'm supportive of this. assuming we get some confidence. Well, you've got some confidence, Nick, about Hayfley. We didn't have that back at HED. That's good. I really want to hear what Spectrum has to say, because it could be, they could do all of the unserved homes, and that would make a big difference. This is, you know, if we patch Hayfley and broadband, Point broadband together, and that's it, we have still a lot of gaps. So I probably won't vote for this if we don't have better information from Spectrum next week, but I think this is a good move. Getting it out of this committee doesn't mean it's out of the legislature. We then will have a full debate next week.
Thank you, Martha. Okay, I've got Mike and then Rich.
Yes, Deborah, I certainly support broadband, and all the things you said is absolutely right. We need the broadband for all those purposes. I'm having a problem here with this process. I don't even think we've asked the town of Newfield. Is that right, Nick, to contribute here?
We did not ask them formally to contribute. It was considering that, you know, that this came up relatively quickly and had a quick turnaround. It didn't seem like it was, you know, gonna be supportive of having to go through both the county process and the town process for funding. So no, we did not.
Well, I think we should have, or we should, let's put it that way, in the future here. I think we ought to have some kind of a policy that says if we're going to support this, and I don't know if $417 is the right figure, because apparently we're trying to push this through quickly, because otherwise it was going to be a larger figure. And maybe the next provider is going to have a larger figure necessary, because they aren't going to have a crew in the field. But I think we should have an ask of something from the local municipality. The county just can't be the big brother and pay for everything that comes along. We need support. I think the study was set up so that the other towns that were interested in this were contributing to the study. Now that we've got down to actually building something, I don't think it's out of line to ask Newfield to put in a few $1,000s.
Well, I think that's the point, Mike, and certainly there's nothing about this resolution that precludes us from asking them to offer some financial support for this expenditure. In any event, okay.
If we can ask, they can say no, but if perhaps we want to put in a contingency here that it's contingent upon the local municipality contributing. Oh, I don't know. I know they don't have a lot of money. None of the small towns do, but you know, $4,000 or $5,000.
That $5,000 that they were going to contribute to the study.
Oh,
yeah.
You know, that would show that they're in it with us. And I think, I think that's pretty important.
Okay, that's fair. Okay, I've got Rich and then Martha again.
Yeah, I'll vote to get it out of committee, but I may vote against it at May meeting. I agree that we should ask for the local municipality to contribute. I really do.
All right, well, that's fair. Martha?
I'm looking at the screen and now it's gone. I saw the Newfield bridge, covered bridge on the screen, so that maybe somebody from Newfield was on the, there, and they've got their hand up. So I don't know who that is.
Newfield Bridge person.
Hi, good afternoon. Thank you for considering this. My name is Mike Allinger. I'm town supervisor with Newfield. Let me try and see if I can get my webcam going. Oh, there, that's better. Yes, thank you for discussing this. Newfield has not been asked to contribute. I don't think that $5,000 is out of line. And if that is something that's contingent upon this passing, then I would certainly bring that to the board as early as this Thursday. I do have some concern about waiting on Spectrum for their offer. to do this build out because Spectrum has not had a good history of delivering what they've been asked for in a timely manner. That's all I have to say, but I'd be here to answer any other questions.
I appreciate your concerns about Spectrum, Mr. Ellinger. Does anybody else have anything they'd like to address directly to Mr. Ellinger? Martha?
Hi, Mike. It's great to see you and thanks for joining this and thanks for, you know, as one person on your board agreeing to $5,000. I would say, I think we're not going to wait forever for Spectrum. I just want to have given them a chance to respond. And so, you know, they have that time if we have our full vote next Tuesday instead of tonight.
Yeah, I agree with that, Martha. I think that they've had plenty of time. I mean, by the 14th, it will have been a full 6 weeks, and they are just too big to move quickly, and that's their fault. Does anyone else have anything they want to say? Thank you, Mr. Ellinger, for tuning in, and we'll look forward to hearing the results of your meeting.
Thank you. And who should I contact with the results of the meeting?
I'm sorry?
Whom should I contact with the results of the meeting?
I think if you let our clerk, Kathy Covert, know what the results are, that's C.
Okay.
Covert at tompkins-co.org. She will get that information to everyone who needs it.
Very good. And I thank you for considering this.
Well, you're welcome. Thank you. Okay, are we ready to vote? No. Okay, Mike, you have another
I
comment?
want to amend it to say that a fourth resolve, that this resolution is contingent upon the town of Newfield agreeing to contribute $5,000 toward the cost.
Does anybody want to second that offered amendment? Martha, are you seconding it?
Yeah, if it gets a stronger vote, yes.
Okay, discussion on the amendment. All right.
I just think it's putting down in writing what Mr. Ellinger just told us that he thought his board was likely to do.
All right, I'm a little reluctant to do this only because I would hate to deprive 180 people of internet for $5,000. So are we ready, Martha?
If we find out next Tuesday that the town board disagreed with the supervisor, then we can take that up again too.
Yeah, we'll take that up in consideration of the entire resolution. So are we ready to vote on the proposed amendment? All right, all in favor? That's 3 opposed. 2 against, that carries. Do we wish to vote on the amended resolution now? Are we ready? Okay, all in favor? That's unanimous. All right. Our next resolution is approving a funding agreement with New York State Department of Transportation for PIN 37561 Tompkins County Culvert Replacement Project ID 10322. Does someone want to move that? Martha moves it, Mike seconds. I would like to offer an amendment as it appears in your red folder. Just to make it clearer that even though this is supposed to be 100% funded by the feds, it's still going to cost us $1.7 million, and why that is. So I offer that. Is it friendly to the mover and seconder, Martha? Shaking her head, yes.
Yes.
Mike?
Just trying to find what you're proposing.
It's here. It should be in your red
In your
folder.
Red folder.
This is what you emailed, or
Yeah.
somebody emailed today.
I emailed it last night and our clerks were on it. It just puts in the numbers that are, so people understand why, despite the fact that we have a grant for 100% of this project, we're still paying close to $2 million for it.
That's friendly.
Okay, great. So that's friendly. Does anybody have any objections? All right, so we're voting on this resolution as amended. Martha?
Yeah, I have a question for Lisa. In the memo, it says, let me see. This will be paid through a transfer from American Rescue Plan Act funds. So my question is, and I would like to ask that tonight's discussion as well, are we going to, do you have a list right now of what projects you're planning to seek ARPA funds for, and like how, just interested in knowing how we're going to find out the full set of ARPA projects.
As part of the capital budget, you mean?
Cash for capital, yeah.
Sure, yeah. We do have those determined as part of the capital plan that we were going to be presenting on next Tuesday, the 14th.
Okay, so this is one of those, and it'll be in that whole program.
Yes,
Okay, thank you. That's great.
sure.
Any other questions? We ready to vote? All in favor? That's unanimous. All right, rolling right along. All right, next resolution, appropriation from the contingent fund to the Human Services Coalition for a Continuum of Care Strategic Action Plan, ID 10314. And can I get a motion on that? Oh, did I see your hand, Rich?
Yep.
Okay, Rich moves, Martha seconds. Do we have any questions? Martha?
Line 24 and 5, Housing and Economic Development did not consider this.
Okay.
So that should just be struck.
All right. So is that an amendment?
Consider that friendly.
Okay, great. So it's friendly. Nobody has any objection, I would assume. It's actually accurate. Are we ready to vote on this? All in favor? Thank you. Okay. Resolution, budget adjustment and appropriation of unspent funds from 2020 and prior years to various accounts of the departments that report to the Public Safety Committee, ID 10342. And Rich, we'll let you move this and speak to it if need be. Rich moves. Do I have a second? Martha. Okay. Take it away, Rich.
These are just all the rollover funds that came through public safety as well.
Okay, and as well, I would note that there's an amended version of this in your red folders, and I assume there are some arithmetical corrections to make this more accurate.
The one in the folder I see is for the rollover for Health and Human Services.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry. All these committees I'm not on, they look alike.
They do look alike.
Okay. All right. Do we have any discussion on this one, or are we ready to vote? All in favor? That's unanimous. Thank you. Okay. Resolution scheduling a public hearing on the 2022 Tompkins County Budget and the 2022 through 2026 Tompkins County Capital Program, ID 10354. Can I get a motion on that one? Rich moves, Glenn seconds. Discussion? Questions? I think you have to ask the boss. Yeah, I usually do. Kathy? We need you. Do in your schedule, because it's been amended a couple of times and I'm not sure I've looked at the final one. Do we have a public forum as well as this public hearing scheduled?
I have October 6th with a question mark in my calendar.
I believe Dominic is handling it this year, and the tentative date is Thursday, Martha, October 6th.
That's a Wednesday.
It would be the next day, October 7th. Is the tentative date I have set for it.
Is that right, Dominic? Thank you, Kathy.
Dominic?
I can check with Dominic. I have both the 6th and the 7th in my calendar, so I will check with him and clarify.
But we do have a forum on tap, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Have to
We just
clarify.
don't need a resolution to schedule that.
And I believe we were scheduling it for Thursday, October 7th, to avoid the Common Council meeting that Wednesday.
That would make sense.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks, Kathy. And thank you, Lisa. All right, so that being the case, are we ready to vote on this resolution? All in favor? Thank you, that's unanimous. Okay, resolution appropriating from contingent fund to cover expenses. Uh-oh, I wrote through that. Related to the restoration of the Tompkins County Historic Map, Facilities Department, ID 10325. Somebody like to move that? Mike moves it. Glenn seconds it. I love that map, personally. Is there any discussion? Mike?
Yeah, this was something that we started when Jason was still here. He asked Carol Cam and I to look into it after we brought up the issue of the deterioration of the map. It's not just a map, it's a painting.
Right.
It's on paper. And so we were been in the process for some time, and Lisa carried forward with us on it. We appreciate that. And it's up at Wesley Conservators. We have an estimate. And unfortunately, Facilities just doesn't have any cash to be able to do this. So to go forward, Lisa suggested that we do a contingent request, and that's what's here.
Thank you, Mike. Anybody else? Martha?
Mike, will the frame be the same?
No, it'll be a new frame, a new glass. Oh, it'll be actually plexi. And we're having photographs of it taken so we can possibly use them in brochures or other things in the future. But it was actually painted by the county's first historian, Glenn Norris. So he was not only a historian, but he was an artist.
It's a plexiglass and it has a light filter so it doesn't fade.
Yeah, this is what they're recommending.
Okay, yeah, good. Okay, great. Anybody else? Are we ready to vote? All right, all in favor? That's unanimous. Gosh,
Thank
we're
you.
an agreeable group.
Thank you.
Okay, next resolution is the one I mistook for the resolution before. Budget adjustment and appropriation of unspent funds from 2020 and prior years to various accounts of the departments that report to the Health and Human Services Committee, ID 10327. Can I get a motion on that one? Rich moves, Martha seconds. And again, now, please note that this has been amended to reflect math corrections, I guess. If anybody has any questions about that, maybe Lisa can fill us in. Lisa?
Yeah, so the health department was expecting to spend some of their rollover this year on the purchase of electric vehicles, but those vehicles are backed up in the factory. They will not be able to get them until 2022. So they have since backed that request out of their 2021 ask, and that's now going to be use of rollover in the 2022 budget. So that's the reason for the change.
Okay, thanks, Lisa. That makes sense. Any other questions? Martha?
Yeah, packet page 35, second page of the health department's listing, where it talks about the New York State Department of Health permitted an increase in state aid reimbursement so that nurses worked on COVID. And normally we get state aid for those. Normally they don't usually get state aid under children with special care needs, but they obviously got aid here. So does that, first off, I thought that was interesting. That was one of those items where we actually got budget relief for ongoing staff because of the pandemic that we normally wouldn't have gotten. But then I thought, well, now salary is not subject to rollover. I'm trying to understand how this fits in here. In other words, if it used to be, we put this in place when I was, one of the first years I was here, so that department heads didn't like deliberately delay filling a position so they could save the rollover, save that salary recovery as rollover. We want, if we voted to fill a position, we wanted them to go ahead and fill it, not just delay so they could sort of bank some money. So how?
Well, because these are people that we would have otherwise had to hire specially and not part of our usual target.
But isn't this salary recovery? In other words, money that we didn't. I'm trying to understand how this fits in. And is this the same kind of salary recovery that shouldn't actually produce rollover?
It's a good question, Martha. So it is salary it's reimbursement that we weren't expecting to get for salary lines in children with special care needs.
So it's not like we didn't hire people. We did hire people. We just didn't have to pay them because the state paid us. So I guess that's an exception to the policy.
All right, let me try this out. Let's say we have a position that's normally covered by state aid and they increase their reimbursement instead of by some fantasy, instead of 30%, they start reimbursing department 40%. Isn't that not kind of the same idea? And I would think that difference, that extra reimbursement wouldn't fold into the rollover budget, would it?
Sounds like it would.
I guess it depends on what revenues what expenses it displaced. I can go back and ask Frank and Brenda for a little more clarification on that.
And maybe Rick, I don't know, what, Mike, you were nodding, what do you think? Does that make?
I think you're raising a really good point, because just because we got reimbursed doesn't become a rollover add-on to the department, I don't think. That's the way I'm looking at it.
It's bad news for Frank, don't tell him.
Well, okay. I hear from Rick, but my feeling is that there's a big difference from getting an unexpected reimbursement for salary and versus not hiring people because you want to save money for rollover. And I think they may deserve to be treated differently under our policy. But again, I'd like to hear from Rick.
Okay, so if I follow your question, you're asking if we get reimbursed for salaries in a department, should that give them extra rollover?
Yep. Just let him.
I have another example.
Okay.
For example, the planning department is always getting grants, and often the grants include some allocation for administration or for staff time to do the work. I don't think that salary savings goes into rollover.
Correct. Anything that's in the expense line item for salaries does not, any savings in any personal services or fringes does not get included in rollover calculation. So that sets the stage for the next question. What about those who get reimbursed grant money for a portion of their salaries? The simple answer is that if that's already in their budget and they have budgeted that grant and they get that same amount, they don't get rollover added to or subtracted from for that revenue source. DSS is the only organization that goes back at the end of the year and revises both their salary figures and the portion of reimbursement revenue at the end of the year so that they don't get dinged twice for not achieving the revenue that they thought they might get. So it's pretty complicated when it comes to personal services, but the short answer is any savings in personal services does not get included in their rollover.
Well, you really nailed that custard pie to the wall, Rick. I don't know where that leads us as to whether or not this is $297,000 that should be included in Frank's rollover.
Well, to the extent that if they've asked for this, I'm the one that certifies the rollover amount. So if Frank or anybody else has asked for this money to come out of that rollover, that has already been certified by the finance department as legitimate and by the county administration, or it wouldn't be in this resolution.
Okay.
In other words, we tell the departments what their rollover is at the year, not the other way around.
And when did you tell them that they had this $297,000?
Whenever Kevin sent out the rollover emails to each and every department, it was sometime between, I want to say July and probably in July, because he left in July. I think it was one of the last things that he did. I don't know when he sent it out, but I know I performed the rollover calculations for him. I think he got it the last week that he was here, and then sent those emails out to every single department that says, here's your certified rollover as calculated by the finance department.
So
Yeah.
this was done, as it's always done, by finance and admin, and this is not usually something the legislature weighs in on?
Correct. I mean, the rollover is certified as a rollover is, but what the legislature can take part in this discussion and why it comes to you in the form of a resolution is if you approve these use rollover or not the amounts or how it was calculated or any of that backroom stuff, but do you approve these uses of the rollover, which they do have?
Okay, I
It's
understand.
like a yes
that.
or no.
Okay, so I've got Martha and then Mike.
I mean, I appreciate that other people have approved it, but isn't it possible a mistake is made? I think what you explained actually confirms that this amount shouldn't be rollover. You just said personal savings from personal services, that is salary, does not get added into rollover. And, you know, people make mistakes. This is an unusual situation. This wasn't a grant that planning gets every year. It wasn't DSS's calculations. This was a pandemic. I don't think, this doesn't make sense to me that this amount of money is then kind of saved by the department. It should be budget relief for the general fund, I think. But just based on what you've just said. Is it possible to go back and review this before the legislature approves it, or is there, I mean,
Well, the amount of the adjustment and appropriation doesn't require us to resolve that specific question.
Right, the
I don't
appropriation,
think.
yeah, I don't have any problem. That's right.
Right. I mean, I just think that this might be something we want to follow up on to clarify so that we all understand that if this is an exception to the general rule, why is it an exception? I think that's the question.
Right, I support the expenses, but not this calculation.
Okay. No, there isn't, because there's enough even without the 297 to cover the request for the reappropriations. That's what I was saying. This doesn't need to be nailed down before our meeting this afternoon at 5:30. Mike, did you have a question?
I just wanted to say I agree with Martha, and it's not the purpose for the expenditures that's the question. It's whether that money was available for those, and would they still request it if it wasn't available? If so, they might have to go and request a contingency resolution. I think this needs to be ironed out before we approve those expenditures for that rollover.
Martha?
Yeah, in fact, the dollars don't quite add up. This is carryover from previous years is 230,000. Their expenses are 252.
No, as it's amended in your red folder, it's 155.20.
Oops, okay. Well, then that's not a problem. Okay.
Yeah, that's not a problem.
But I think what Mike is saying is if they thought they did not have this extra 297, would they have asked for all of these expenses? Is that what you kind of meant?
Yeah.
Yes.
I see. Okay.
Well, that's up to Frank, I would imagine. I guess if need be, we can pull this from the agenda after Lisa and or Rick speak with Frank.
Yeah, I'll try to get in touch with Frank as soon as possible.
Okay, thank you, Lisa. And meanwhile, we can go ahead and vote on this. So is there anything else?
I'll vote to move it forward, but I don't know if I can vote for it if we have those expenditures in there on the floor. We got to figure it out somehow.
Yeah, that's what I'm hoping that we'll learn from Frank. Martha?
If we have to, we could postpone this till September 14th. That would help Frank.
Or our next regular meeting, whatever.
I mean, if we move it out of committee today, then the legislature could look at it next week.
Yeah, and there's always a possibility that there's a reason why that $297,000 should be included in rollover. We're going to get that nailed down as well, I hope. So thank you, Rick and Lisa. Does anybody else have something? Rich, you look like you're...
Yes. Yeah, I'd favor just putting it off for a month. Let's get it sorted out.
Before we vote on it in committee?
Yes.
So is that a motion to table this?
Sure.
A second on that? Mike, all in favor? Okay, that's unanimous and this is tabled. Thank you. Lisa?
Madam Chair, so I'm kind of communicating with Frank. He's available right now to join he just needs the Zoom link if you'd like to try to clear it up right now, or I can talk to him if you prefer to.
Well, I guess there's two issues here, and there's a lack of appetite for moving forward, at least on this committee, until we get both of them straightened out. One of them is whether or not that $297,000 should be part of their rollover. And then the second one is, if it's not, might Frank want to reconsider spending this amount on these items? Unless there's some burning urgency here, I think it can wait.
I think I don't want to speak for them, but I believe for the funds requested in the current year's budget, they are in the process of ordering some of the video equipment or wanted to get that started. So
Well, we have a table motion.
okay,
So-
all right, so that's fine. I'll follow up with him.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
All right. And that was the easy stuff. Now,
So I'm sorry, is this table to the next BCP?
yeah. So now we'll get to the hard stuff. Resolution to update the Administrative Policy Manual, Policy 0504, Fund Balance ID 10351. Can I get a motion on that? Rich moves. Do I have a second? Oh, well, I'll second it. Mark, okay, fine. All right, discussion. Martha.
Well, I was part of the discussion at GO, was that just last week? And sometimes it feels like you've already, the whole conversation, but it's just with a different set of five. So I think there's a lot that's very positive in this policy, and I think it's, an improvement, really a lot of clarification here. Especially I like the idea of a sort of phased attention to increasing fund balance when we go below a target. And I appreciate Rick's clarification on that one question I had over email. I guess I'm moving this with, I seconded this to have a discussion that I would like to propose one slight amendment. I mean, it's a small word change, but it's a meaningful change. This is packet page 40, general fund, this is on the targets, fund balance target. So it's policy A, fund balance targets, 2A, general fund, the target should be 18%. Period, not a range, to remove the upper limit. If I get a second, I'll explain that.
I'll second that. Okay.
So if I could take a minute to.
Yeah.
So as we discussed it at GO, the policy does give direction as to what happens if we go below the target. But I kind of question why have an upper range if there's not a similar direction about what to do if we go over the top target, the top part of the range. I think the idea that we want to make sure we're covered, we have, according to GFOA guidance, that we have at least 2 months of operating expenses. And as Rick has said, that would be 16.7% of our general fund amounts. And at 18%, that gives us an extra buffer. So that's certainly the safety net that we want. I think that specifying a top range is really sort of superfluous and actually could have unexpected consequences on legislature and staff behavior. I'm not sure that's really what we are looking for here. So I think we want to make sure we've got that safety net. I think 18% does it.
Thank you. Okay. So is this a friendly amendment?
No.
Okay. Rich.
As Martha said, this is a repeat of the discussion we had at GO. But what I said there was, I think the 18% is important to indicate to us that our fund balance is too low. But my understanding of the purpose of the range is that the upper limit is to tell us maybe it's too high. And of course, this is a policy. We can We can veer away from it if we so choose, but it's to give us guidance on both of those things, whether it's too low or too high. And the range does that. So that was my understanding of why it was a range.
Okay, thank you. Mike?
I agree with Rich and what he said.
Okay, I watched your GO meeting and I paid close attention to your discussion of this. And my takeaway was that a real difficulty with amending this policy would be deciding and getting agreement on what the consequences of having a too large fund balance would be. Clearly, we're a long way from achieving any kind of consensus on if we're at 24%, what do we do? Does that mean we have to spend it? What do we have to spend it on? Is it a trigger? Does it mean anything at all? And that, to me, was the real sticking point that you all had. If there are no consequences to our fund balance being, quote, unquote, what's the point of defining what too high is? It is superfluous. My feeling is that the important thing here is to define what our minimum should be. And once we've defined that and the consequences of not achieving and maintaining that minimum, then our job in terms of this policy is done. And for that reason, I support Martha's proposal. So I guess we're going to vote on Martha's amendment. Does anybody have anything else to say about this? Martha?
I think it's important, and Dan spoke at this at the GO meeting. He really didn't want to see this policy at all. He voted against it altogether because he really didn't. He felt it was all too constraining on the legislature, and he just wanted the legislature to have sort of an open-ended playing field to evaluate the status of the fund, unassigned fund balance, if I understood correctly. So I would be willing to support an 18 to 20%. If somebody wants a range, you really want a range, I would be willing to support 18 to 20. I think 18, flat 18 solves the problem we have. I think when you establish the upper limit, I have already seen people start making that translation in their head that the upper limit is actually the floor. And that's where I think the upper limit is, would have unintended consequences that would constrain us and lead to decisions that are unnecessarily narrow, let's say, or unnecessarily conservative. If the point is we want to make sure we have 2 months of fund balance, two months worth of operating expenses in our fund balance, 18% is significantly above that 2 months. And I think that's great. I don't really think we should put the extra limit of the upper limit on it. But if that would be something that would get 3 votes, I would support that. Just tossing it out there.
Okay, Glenn and then Mike.
One real quick question. How can we only get 10%?
You gotta use your microphone.
You're out of practice, Glenn.
Yeah, I guess I am. I'm the wrong desk too. Highway machinery fund is stuck at 10%. Why doesn't that have a range?
I think you will have to ask Mr. Snyder that.
All I heard was highway machinery fund. What was it? Why are we,
It's identified as only 10%. It does not have a range.
I don't think any of them should have a range.
So is the debt service fund, it's at 10%.
highway machinery, the road and highway machinery funds, I can give an example. This year, right now, they ran out of money. They're broke. They've gotten all the money from the general fund they're supposed to get from the year, yet they're broke. That's because they didn't get any CHIPS funding this year so far, which is over $4 million. So we have to loan that fund money. That's the D fund or the road fund. And the higher level of reserve that you have in the road and the road machinery fund, the less chance of them having cash flow or borrowing needs throughout the year. So we went from 5 to 10% on that for those cash flow reasons. The debt service fund really doesn't even need a particular threshold because all the money that's in that fund has to be spent in that fund. It can't be spent, it's restricted. It can't be used for anything other than debt proceeds. But for those same reasons, we like to keep at least 10% reserve in that fund because a large part of our debt service payments are on January 1st of each year. So if you close the year at a zero balance with no reserve, you can't make your debt service payments on January 1st and February 1st. And unfortunately, because that's the way we float our bonds, most of our payments are heavy loaded to be paid in January 1st and February 1st. So that's why we up those categories a bit. Besides, they already have significantly more than 10% right now, as all our funds have significantly more than these minimum targets. The airport fund and the solid waste fund, we've increased those because they're enterprise funds and they need that kind of cash floor in order for their cash flow purposes to be able to satisfy, just like any other enterprise fund, so that the general fund doesn't have to be constantly loaning money to them. So really all of those were thought out based on cash flow needs versus how much we actually want them to keep in reserve, for future planning. Those are just pretty much looked at as enterprise type funds or internal service funds. The general fund is the one we really concentrated the most are trying to get a good median of what other counties are doing and try to get a perspective on how much we might need in a worst case scenario. COVID was a good example of a worst case scenario. Our cash balances in the general fund, and I have to thank Drew for alerting this to me after last week's meeting, but our general fund went from at its highest to its lowest point during the year was a $40 million gap. So our existing cash in the bank due to COVID was a $40 million variance from high to low during years. That's a lot of money. Most governments couldn't afford a $40 million swing in their cash account. Like Tompkins County bore that, and we were able to bear it, and we never had to bring the legislature, not one time, not ever, a hint of us being in any kind of cash shortage position. But that was a $40 million swing. And if you look at these numbers, what is $40 million as a percentage compared to overall budget? About 20%. So during the COVID last 2 years, our balances have swung 20% of what our budget is. So, that's why Jason and I have been pushing for this for as long as he was here, and it just wasn't a front burner topic. As far as giving you a range to pick from, like 18 to 23%. With that range, bearing in mind that the low end would be a cautionary point. If you fell below, the legislature might want to take some action if it fell below the minimum threshold. The top range being that the legislator might begin to want to do something if they went above the high range threshold. Anything in between was to provide to you, the legislature, a comfort level that you're okay where you're at. Because in past years, up until now, over the last 3 or 4 years, we have spent an inordinate amount of time talking about fund balance. We have spent too much time orchestrating what a policy may or may not be. And we offered up a range. It wasn't my idea, it was Jason, because I just threw out a number like Martha did today, saying, let's go with X as a number. But Jason offered a range because he wanted to set the stage so that the legislature could pay attention to key priority issues instead of spending so much time on where we are with fund balance. So if you fell between 18 and 23%, you could let it alone for a year. You didn't have to study it. You didn't have to get out a microscope and find out what we were doing wrong or what we were doing. We were comfortable within that range. That's why the range concept was brought to you initially, was so that the legislature would, once they fell within that range, they knew that they didn't have to get out a whole lot of tools to fix at budget time, something that didn't need to be fixed. If it fell below the minimum, you might ought to look at it. If it went above the maximum, you might want to look at it. But that was the philosophy and the staging for why we thought we'd offer you a range, so that every year I give my financial presentation, which just was last July, this past month or two ago, I spend 75% of the time talking about what? Fund balance. That's been the last 3 years. All we talked about, it seems, is fund balance. You never really get to hear the full report of the full finances of the county because we spend so much time on fund balance. So we thought we'd give you a range so that in years where you fell within that range, we could all be satisfied and we could get on and look at other important pieces of the budget and other finance matters.
Thank you, Rick. Martha, and then Mike.
With respect, I don't think you answered Glenn's question, which was, why are some of these funds proposed to have a range and others are simple flat numbers? That's one thing. So I don't hear any answer to that question. I think we have talked about fund balance because it's kind of a one number thermostat. It's a signal of our overall health, and I think we correctly understand it as probably a simplified, maybe oversimplified signal of our fiscal health. But it's a good, a good measure to follow. And I think a lot of the conversation has lately been because of ARPA, which doesn't come around very often. That, because we had to make decisions about ARPA funds, it did bleed into the fund balance conversation. And I think that's pretty unusual. With respect, Jason only brought the revised fund balance policy to budget, capital, and personnel once. We had an initial conversation about it and events took over and we never got back to it. But last year we did talk about it once in committee. But at any rate, I think the point is still a good question from Glenn is why are some of these proposed to have ranges and others aren't? And I support increasing the floors. I mean, a 10, our target right now for the unassigned general fund is 10. That's ridiculous. All of these increases make a lot of sense, but since we're talking about whether we should do a flat number or a range, why are some proposed for ranges and some for flat numbers?
Mostly because the smaller funds, the ones that are internal service funds or enterprise funds, the minimum threshold is all we're really worried about, to maintain minimum cash flow coverage and that we have the ability to stay in business, whether it's solid waste, airport, the road fund. We're only really looking at hitting that cautionary red light, and that's why there's only ever been a single number there.
So we might as well make these, airport 16%, solid waste 16, highway 10, and debt service 10. I guess I would make that motion if I don't hear any reason to keep the ranges. I don't.
Well, procedurally, it would seem
Okay.
to me that we have to deal with the amendment that's proposed and on the floor. Mike,
Got it.
you had-
Yeah. You know, it's not new that we've been talking about this 18 to 23% range. This is the first time it's been brought forward as the policy. But we've asked Rick and Jason about it before, and they said we just haven't had the time to spend on it. But this is what we've been talking about, is this range. So I think it makes a lot of sense for to keep the range as it's proposed here. I'm worried that the unintended consequences may be not having an upper range, and then legislators say, well, there's a lot more money to spend. Let's spend it. I worry about that, what you just said, Rick, about the $40 million change in the amount of the budget. That's new to me. I hadn't heard that one before. And that's pretty scary.
Yep.
And we're in a situation right now that we're still mid-pandemic. We just missed the heavy rains from a hurricane. Thank goodness, with the second time we've been lucky enough not to have them. We could have other kinds of things that we aren't even thinking about could happen in our county. I keep saying we're going to have an ice storm, for example. But we need to have that money to protect ourselves. We also had the money there to help protect our college, which needed some help with its inability to borrow and yet had a huge cash flow issue for its payroll, for example. And we can't look to our sister county, Cortland, very often to be able to help in those situations either. So I think the upper end is fine. I don't think we'd even be talking about it if it wasn't for the ARPA fund and the issue of how much fund balance can we spend this year. I think it's important that we keep this range as proposed. I think it was a good idea a couple of years ago, and I think it's a good idea now.
Anyone else?
You're settling on 23%? You're settling on 23%?
That's right.
Okay. The Martha's at 20%, right?
That'd be my upper limit if we're going to have a range. Yes.
I would follow the recommendation from staff that it's the general fund 18 to 23. Seems to comply with GASB, and I see it as an upper limit where we're getting direction that we could spend above that. If we go above it, we could spend down for a bit.
But that's not what the policy says.
Well, the policy is silent on the subject of what happens if you exceed the upper level of the range, which is why I think if there's no consequence to having a range, if there's no consequence at the upper end, there doesn't seem to be much point in even having a range, which is the basis of my support for Martha's amendment. But yeah, does anybody have anything else they want to say? Let's vote on this first proposed amendment. And then if we want to discuss tinkering with the upper level of the range, we can do that after we've decided whether we want to go with a flat rate.
Just to be clear, this is to not have a range.
Right, to just cap it at 18%. So all in favor? 2. All opposed? Okay, that's 3 that fails. Martha, do you have something else you want to move?
I would change 23 to 20 on that page. So it's an 18 to 20% range.
Okay, I will second that just to get it discussed. Any discussion? Martha?
Frankly, if we were in any kind of danger when we hit $40 million swing, yeah, it sounds wild But I know we always have receivables, we always have, things that come and go, and the cash in the bank is not usually dispositive, to use Julie's word. So a $40 million swing sounds like terrifying, but if it was really that much of an issue, I'm surprised we're just hearing about it now. So we trust you all to manage those kinds of issues and keep everybody's blood pressure under control. And if we ever do have a problem with a swing that isn't going to be manageable, then really there's a big red flag is going to be needed. But so I think 18 to 20 is careful, it's conservative, it's a great safety net, and I think we should go with it.
Any other discussion? Okay. So all in favor of 18 to 20? Okay, that's one. All opposed? You're going to have a range that might as well be meaningful. But just 2% just doesn't strike me as particularly meaningful range, and I'm sure we will relitigate all of these issues at tonight's legislature meeting for the third and final time. So now we are voting on the resolution as proposed by administration. Do we have any further discussion? Okay, all in favor? That's 4. And all opposed? That's 1. Okay. All right, I think that's all we've got today, budgeteers. Does anybody have anything else they want to raise, or can we take a break until the ledge meeting, 5:30? Okay, I declare this meeting adjourned. Thank you.